Okay, great. It's been a while since I last recorded anything. As some of you might know, I'm currently in a job that takes up a lot of my time, and that is something that I think a lot about nowadays in terms of like creative fields, because my job is somewhat adjacent to a lot of creative work. That in creative fields, right, like it's so easy for so much more of your life to be involved in the creative process, right? So as you know, like I normally would enjoy going to museums or enjoy reading books or enjoy seeing new things, and all these things would come with their own ideas and their own thoughts and their own explorations, and then those things run parallel to like the things that I'm doing in my job, right? So a lot of times when I see myself sort of like seeing things that I see on my personal basis, like things that I do out of my own time and effort, and seeing how that would fit into my job, and how that might benefit the people that I'm trying to help in my job. But at the same time, is it really to my own benefit as an employee? That's a question I have a lot, because a lot of people say do what you love, do what you're passionate about, but I still believe that there's some things in your personal life or things that you do out of your own like interests that shouldn't be taken into your job, because it's not that your job is valued at that, you know what I mean? Like regardless of how much you pour into a job, the output is still going to be the same in terms of like really practical, on a very practical basis. So it doesn't really make sense to then take your whole life and put it into your job, because that's not going to yield you anything much more than what it is already yielding you. Anyway, let's talk about the books. The past few months of reading have been really interesting for me. I will admit that it was very challenging to read, full stop. But I still have the absolute privilege of having Ethos Books send me books to read and review, and I have not been the most consistent in reviewing things on my Instagram, again because I find it very difficult to condense things into words, which is why I'm still in awe of like book reviewers that are able to write about books. You know, people always ask me, oh, are you a writer because you love reading books? And I'm like, no, I'm not a writer. I just enjoy books and ideas. The two books that Ethos Books sent me is Catskull by Myle, as well as The Singapore I Recognize by Kirsten. So these two books are really very different. This is a novel. This is Myle like first ever written novel. When I say written, I mean obviously yeah, I mean he typed this. So this is it looks really thick, but it was so easy to get through in terms of like it was so action-packed, and you might type it as like teenage angst, but the way that the novel is written with all its characters, it also alludes to more of a general societal angst, or a very like dramatized exaggerated type of angst that I feel is kind of like the undercurrent of how current affairs feels like in Singapore. So I think it's done really well in a way that that kind of very abstract feeling, that really like itchy feeling, has been so well characterized in the main protagonist of this novel. It's kind of like a, well, what's that? It's almost like a superhero type story where, is it called vigilante? I'm so bad at like superhero terms, but basically Ram is a teenager that is trying to do right however he can in his capacity in society's underbelly in Singapore. So certain topics come up, things like say the issue of migrant workers in Singapore, Singaporeans' attitudes towards them, and there's some really difficult topics in this book, and I do think there's a trigger warning at the start that does say that, you know, there is mention of assault, of racism, and sexual abuse, and that, you know, if you see that you're not in the right space to read the book and to continue reading the book, you can put it down. So it does not shy away from those things, and that's something that I really appreciate about Yen's writing, which is that in all the works I've seen of his plays and his comics, he doesn't shy away from these difficult topics, and he uses humor so effectively. Not in a way that's very like slapstick humor, but he uses like comedy humor. He uses these layers of meanings so well that is not like it's not like a snobby intelligence sort of humor. It's not like, haha, I'm smarter than you and therefore I get this joke and you don't, but it's a kind of like a cynical, yet somehow I feel like there's a bit of hope in that cynicism, that sort of humor where like, haha, I'm joking about this, but hey, let's think about it a bit more seriously. And that's how I really felt when I watched his play, Brown Boys Don't Tell Jokes. That was full on like amazing, and a lot of people loved it. And so is this novel, in a sense that it is kind of like a comic book in a novel form, but it's a comic book that is so well thought out and doesn't leave a lot of gaps. And I feel like it is kind of a YA style of like approachability. Like it feels approachable in its language, yet it touches on topics that I hardly see a lot of local literature touch on, in a way that really questions the status quo here in Singapore. So I find it a really good novel, and I would recommend it to people who, I've never read a local novel before. Aren't all local literature the same thing? Always talking about buildings being demolished, always talking about, the rift between generations. Aren't all books in Singapore about that? And I think to those kinds of people, I would recommend a book like this that's very gripping. It's provocative in a way that still makes it safe for you to question things. It's kind of like a thriller sort of feeling, like, oh, I don't want to see it continue, but I kind of want to see it continue. So that's this for you. I'm not going in chronological order. Usually when I do wrap-ups, I go in chronological order, but because the past few months, I've just been dipping in and out of books anyhow, it doesn't make sense to go chronologically anymore. The next book that Ethos sent me is called The Singapore I Recognize, and this is a book that has been in making for a while. This is written by Kirsten, who is a very well-known independent activist, journalist here in Singapore, and she mainly works on kind of advocacy for the abolishment of the death penalty in Singapore. If you don't already know, Singapore does still have a death penalty for drug-related offences. So Kirsten is really like an activist that is really out there, like really pushing things, really publishing a lot. She does have a newsletter that you can subscribe to, and it's just like a book that I would say it's half encapsulating her journey as an activist, but also half encapsulating what the scene of activism looks like in Singapore today. I felt like I didn't really know, was I supposed to read this more from her personal standpoint, or was I supposed to read the scene from her point of view? But at the same time, it doesn't really make sense to be reading the scene from her point of view, because again, like, activist circles and advocacy in Singapore is a huge collective effort. So it felt a bit strange to be dipping in and out of her perspective while trying to really describe or try to get a bigger understanding of the activist scene in Singapore. But I do think that this is a really timely publication, in the sense that, it's so hard to come by books for the general public that's about advocacy in Singapore. There are plenty of academics, I guess, that would read and publish about Singapore advocacy on a very academic levels. I was dipping in and out of this book. This is a book that I got when I was in Seoul in the museum, and it's about basically landscapes and kind of radically reclaiming back these landscapes that have been taken over by settler colonialism, or even in the modern age, still being capitalized on by certain powers. And when I think about advocacy and activism in general, a lot of these things involve breaking the law, involve breaking the rules, and it involves a lot of people on a collective level to occupy spaces, physical spaces, and that is a model that doesn't really work in Singapore. So I do think Kirsten was trying to grasp at a way of trying to garner that kind of collective spirit. And I think she writes a bit about it, how when she was at a dinner event with a lot of the older activists, there was a whole era of I think Chinese schools and their and the activist students that would take the streets and all that. And I think it was something that she also reckoned with in terms of how do we then create this collective feeling of wanting to push boundaries or wanting to question why things are the way they are in Singapore. I feel like maybe I have to give this another read, maybe soon again, to see whether it was really just me being distracted by what I was reading. I felt like the book as a whole wasn't really as tightly planned out, which is not always a bad thing. It's just me being sort of picky about how a book reads. But the content itself, and Kirsten herself is a great is a great activist who does a lot of amazing work in Singapore. And I think it's truly amazing that this in itself as a book is a testament to her work and a testament to how important it is for people to stand up here in this society, because it's extremely difficult to do, and I really respect that. So as a book itself being published in Singapore today, I will include it as a whole list of advocacy in Singapore. I don't think I have time. I just want to quickly go through these two books that I recently read. The first one is called A Flat Place. I think it's by Noreen, if I'm not wrong. This is a book that I stumbled upon when I was just browsing the library. I think that's when the best books come about. It's when you're just browsing and then there's a title that really calls to you. I saw this title actually in the physical library once, and it's about how empty landscapes or flat landscapes helped this author kind of process her complex PTSD. At first I wasn't really convinced, how does that work? What are the intersections? But I gave the book a chance, and it's really quite a read. It was something that got me in a very, very contemplative mood. It was a book that unpacked complex trauma and unpacked family inflicted trauma. It questions the boundaries between memories, lived experiences. It questions how trauma is formed and how it's experienced. What I also really enjoyed was the author's take on landscapes, empty landscapes, and how that really resonated with her, because for us as humans, when we look at the natural landscape, we have certain thoughts that go through our minds. We have certain pictures that we want. We want the mountaintops, we want the valleys, we want to see all this amazing wildlife. But flat landscapes are often spaces that feel boring in a sense. It feels like there's nothing going on, but actually in these flat lands there is a lot going on. And if you walk across the flat land, you would realize that the ground is very uneven. You would realize there's all this wildlife that you can spot that can survive in such a barren landscape. You see that a lot of these landscapes are also a result of human intervention. Maybe they are plantations, they are crops that have been left to die out. Maybe these are places that used to be mines. And so I appreciated that the author Noreen was able to bring both her personal experience with our understanding of landscapes and our perception of the world, our perception of nature, or our understanding of how we shape the environment. And for her, I really appreciated learning about complex PTSD. I don't think I experienced her level of PTSD to such a degree, but it really brings into question this talk about trauma. It is very mainstream now, but what are the labels that help us? And she did write at the end of her book why she wanted to use certain labels, why she decided to talk about herself in a certain way, but she also wanted to talk about how the way that we validate our emotions or our experiences, it's not always clinical. The fact that nothing really happens to you and yet you can come out having a lot of difficulty making attachments to people, having a lot of difficulty remembering things, having a lot of difficulty differentiating between reality and fake memories or perceived dreams that feel like they're real, and then reality feels like dreams. For her, she described her feeling as feeling as though she is not living, it feels like unreal reality. So she feels like a lot of days she goes through life not feeling like she's actually living, and for her that's her feeling of complex PTSD, where she doesn't really have clear moments where she was where she felt really neglected, but it was like a day-to-day thing that really impressed upon her the fact that she felt unsafe, and it was a constant feeling of feeling unsafe, a constant feeling of danger and threat that kind of continued into her adulthood, and how barren landscapes in her journey, going to these landscapes and looking at them and sort of embracing them, learning how to love these landscapes, was a step towards learning how to love herself with all her different and complex issues. And I thought this was such a beautiful connection between the landscape and our mental landscapes, like physical landscapes and mental landscapes, because there's always been a connection, and I think that's one of the points that she wanted to make as well, that our mental lives are very much connected to our natural landscapes, and this is something that I read in a book long time ago about like nature and mental health, and how actually nature is so intrinsically linked to our mental health. So that was just another confirmation of that. So that was one book that I read, and the other book that I read that was very similar was called Underland by Robert Macfarlane. This was recommended to me by the tarot reader. I forgot your name, Tarot on the Moon, that I got a tarot reading from at Wormhole's event at Ethos Books at Dakota Dreams, I think. Very similar. It's about an author that journeys to different landscapes to understand humans' obsession with the underground. I would say this book is about anything that's underground. So it could be underwater caves, it could be mines again. It's a constant thing. For example, the catacombs in, I think it's in the UK, was it in Paris, and how people are so obsessed with going underground. One of the last chapters talks about the nuclear waste disposal facility, about how humans have these plans to dispose of nuclear waste for like the next 10,000 years. And at the end of the whole thing, like, the author had this consistent thought throughout the book, which was that the underground kind of surfaces this feeling of time for him. It surfaces a feeling of like humans being so insignificant in the face of time, because all these things take time to form, or they will endure. And the fact about underground things is that they will endure much longer than things on the surface of the earth, which is very, very interesting to think about. And I enjoyed this book, although I did drift in and out of it a lot of times because I was feeling so distracted. It is a beautiful book for people who are into reading about the earth and about nature, and thinking about, again, the way that we humans approach the earth and the way that we treated the earth. And I don't think it is a book that's necessarily about like climate advocacy, but it is a book that really, really questions like, why are we doing this to the earth? Why are we not stepping back in awe of all these things that the earth already has? There's so little that we understand about these facets of the earth, these underwater caves. There is so many times where these things are so dangerous, and we over assume ourselves to be so powerful in front of these things, like in front of like natural landscapes. We think that we can conquer them, but actually they can just demolish us so easily. That is the feeling that I get from the book, and it's of awe, it's of majesty. And the author ended the book with his 4-year-old son thinking about time again. And I think this is a constant thing for me now, to think about time, because it's good to be reminded sometimes that time is just that, like time in terms of human time, in terms of like universal time, in terms of like the earth's time. These are all such different scales. It's so easy to get absorbed in your own timeline. Like, I've been making so many timelines for my personal use that I see things in weeks and months and at most a few years, but life is so much weirder than that. Time goes in such a weird way. It doesn't really follow anything. Time is time might seem linear, but it might not feel or be experienced in a linear way. like me sharing about all my books. I did not share them in a chronological manner, but I have to go, so I will talk about them next time. So yeah, those are some of the books I read recently, and I'll see you soon with the other books. Hi, I'm back. I kind of want to talk about the things that I saw. So I've seen a couple of things, like exhibitions, plays, experiences, and one of them was this play called Hotel written by Alfian. It kind of felt like a theme park for the whole day. The whole entire play restaged was about 5 hours long. They had it in two segments, like a 2.5 segment and a 2-hour segment, and I watched it on the weekend. So the first section was in the afternoon and the second section was in the evening. For some people who watched it on the weekday, the two sections were on two separate days, so it would be like 2 weekday nights. I think that really would make a difference in terms of how you would experience the play. What was really impressive about the play was the cast. Even though the cast seemed pretty small, I think it was like less than 20 in total, but they played many different characters. I think the cast was around like 10 to 15, at least when they all stood on stage. It wasn't a lot of people in proportion to the number of characters that they played. So I think each person played maybe like 5 or 6 different characters, which was really amazing, and I was really impressed by all the actors, especially the way that they really moved across languages, moved across their characters. The whole kind of setting of a hotel, like, okay, I realized I didn't explain the premise of the play. The play takes place in this hotel room, and looks at the different people that go through it in the different decades, and through that it's kind of like a microcosm of Singapore society through the decades, as seen through the characters that go through this hotel room. Very early ages, you would see a British subject and his wife in a hotel room, and how they would interact with the locals. Then maybe you would see during the Japanese occupation how the hotel itself was occupied as a military base. I bought the play because I wanted to read it, and it's surprisingly short for a play that's like 5 hours long. So I have not read it yet, but I wanted to take the chance to talk about the play because I watched another one recently called Four Horse Road, which had a very similar premise of using a location to talk about the histories and the stories around that space. This was a Chinese-speaking theatre company, which was very new to me because I've never really watched a primarily Chinese-speaking play. That really pushed my understanding of Chinese because I do understand some basic and conversational Chinese, but I was kind of surprised that I did understand the majority of the Chinese that was being spoken, so that was a win for me because I have not really practiced it in a long time. But yeah, that play was a promenade style theatre. This is something new that I learned as well, that what the format of the play was called. So we had to move across different parts of the building. It was the play took place at this series of like three shop houses. So theatre practice occupies like one of them, and then another shop house is occupied by Center 42. I think they kind of just all partnered up, collaborated to create this kind of multi-location style play. I think given the logistical constraints of the space, the experience itself was really interesting and was really like very well thought out, like very intentional in the details. And they created this map of the space where you could scan the QR code to see the different stories at the different locations that they were referencing. I have not seen everything. I saw maybe like 4 or 5 scenes out of the 11 scenes that they had. Okay, moving on to like the next big topic that I see in my reading, thinking about like the climate crisis and books again. I've been wanting to read more about the climate crisis again because I realize I've been so out of touch with it, and it's hard to constantly think about all these big things when your life has become so narrow on a day-to-day basis, and this is how most people would experience their lives, right? I mean, because the thing about the climate crisis is that it's so huge in scale, it requires such big thinking. I think this is a term coined by someone. Oh, I think it's about hyper objects by Tim something. I forgot. But anyway, I've been reading like these two books. I referenced this book earlier, and this one I just been going through a little bit. This is a very interesting book. I don't know whether I talked about it before, probably in my soul vlog. I've just been very slowly going through it. Honestly, I don't know whether the book really achieves what it's trying to do, which is to really question like what if all of human society were to just occupy this one mega city. And thinking about this thing about like longevity of humans as a species or as a kind, and this is something that came up in a book that I read recently on Underland, I think, that I previously talked about. And it's just been coming up again that, you know, what endures in human society, in human civilization, are stories. And even though we might tell ourselves that, oh, this is logical, this is rationality, these are still stories that we tell ourselves. And so I guess I'm in that kind of mindset now, which is kind of wondering like, what are the stories that will persist, right? Outside of the very material things that we'll leave behind, such as like this new rock called what, plastic glomerate, I don't know, I forgot the name, but it's basically when like plastic melts and fuses with different organic matter. It's a new kind of rock that geologists are classifying now. That is a very physical marker of this era. But what are the stories that will be left behind, and will we see a kind of like mystifying of our era again? Like, you know, even though it feels like we live in such a rational age, that what will endure eventually are stories of myth. I feel like I'm moving into a very like sensory part of my life right now, where I am trying to feel things more in a very physical sense, rather than just read things and know them theoretically, conceptually. That's pretty much all I have to say about all the books I've read so far. Not that I've read that many to begin with. So yeah, I'm just gonna end the video here. Thanks so much for watching still, and thanks so much for like your patience in waiting for me. Yeah, I've just been in a very like octopus state of mind, just all tentacles trying to reach out and grab something, so things don't really work in the same like tick 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 straight line anymore for me, and I don't think my wrap-ups will really follow that route anymore. So thanks so much, and I don't know which camera I'm looking at. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.